In the early hours of the morning of Sunday, December 26, 2004, a massive earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale struck the west coast of northern Sumatra. The first quake was followed by aftershocks ranging from 6 to 7.3, themselves large enough to destroy thousands of lives and livelihoods. The quake triggered tsunamis reaching 10 meters in height and moved through the neighboring parts of the Indian Ocean at over 500 kilometers an hour, wrecking coastal areas in India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Maldives. The tsunamis flooded coastal areas and wiped away anything in its path, including homes, buildings, roads, and bridges, as well as corrupting water and electricity supplies, crops, irrigation and fishery infrastructure, as well as food and fuel networks. To date, an estimated 175,000 people lost their lives, and 128,000 are still missing, most of which are presumed dead.
Dad, this is her. This is her shirt, the one that she bought.
Oh my God.
Millions of people have seen their families and communities torn apart, and the trauma caused by this devastating catastrophe cannot be underestimated. This disaster has caused the largest need for humanitarian aid in modern times. At this point, the American government has donated over $350 million of taxpayers' money to the tsunami relief. This comes at a time when our government has the highest debt load in its history, over $7 trillion.
The only problem that I have with the finances of this country lie in giving tax breaks when we're in deficit, Reaganomics, which seem to be making a comeback with this Republican administration, and things of that nature. But to answer your question, I feel that the contributions that our country has made to help the tsunami disaster relief victims have been absolutely required.
I believe that was real nice of them because that's our government, so the fact that they would show some compassion and help give money to someone who's not an American, that's very compassionate.
I feel the money that our government donated for tsunami relief was a quite pitiful attempt considering we're the biggest superpower of the world. And basically I just think that if we're in the top 3 of the world but we're the #1 superpower, we should have had the #1 donation by far.
And what about those $7 trillion of national debt? How did the numbers stack up? The national debt has continued to increase on average about $2.3 billion a day since September 30th, 2004. Our estimated population is 295,691,873 people. So this means if we were to divide up the debt evenly between every citizen of the United States, we would each owe $26,115.11. If this sounds a little outrageous, just consider we are spending an estimated $35 million a day on the war in Iraq. And here, on our own soil, unemployment rates are skyrocketing. And since February 2002, the dollar has lost 50% of its value against the euro.
Well, as the richest country in the world, we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to help other peoples when they are devastated. The $1 billion, $2 billion will not make any difference at all in Social Security, which is going to be down $2 to $3 trillion, and Medicare is going to be down trillions of dollars also. And I think as the moral leader of the world, we have an obligation to help support the victims of the tsunami. Privately, we've donated over $1.2 billion to the tsunami relief, and the government has promised at least $1 billion worth of their own money to the tsunami relief, which is more than enough if you compare that with all the other countries that are contributing to help the victims at least get a start.
The people we had interviewed earlier had reviewed our country's financial status and now had this to say.
I didn't know we were in such a large deficit, but although we are, I didn't feel the effects beforehand and I don't feel it after.
I was actually already aware of our current financial status, and I think that if being $7 trillion in debt is a problem, we shouldn't spend a couple of $100 billion on a war that most people don't even really believe in.
I stand by my original opinion. I feel that it was required on a humanitarian level to help out such numerous victims of such a terrible disaster. I feel that it's other financial decisions which have been made which are not responsible, and I feel that the best thing we can do to get ourselves out of this deficit is to get the neoconservative Republicans out of office.
If you went back to 9/11, and there was certainly support in many ways that poured out from all around this world. I do think people will support us in our time of need and to the best of their capability, and we should support them. That's a disaster that happens not even once in a century, so it's difficult to prepare for those things. But I will say I read one thing about one small village that was saved. They had planted trees. Their mayor convinced them to plant trees. They got in the Guinness World Records for this, and their village remained unharmed. by the tsunami. They were actually saved by the trees. So maybe they could take an example of that village, and learn from that. It would be a less expensive way of trying to protect themselves. So maybe there are simple fixes that we can use to at least help them to some degree.
One day, your life, your country gets washed away. Who helps you? In response to this tragedy, former Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton have joined with the Ad Council to encourage Americans to support humanitarian organizations that are conducting tsunami relief operations. Even though the U.S. is in a state of financial crisis, the American people are supporting of this effort. As of February 20th, 1/3 of all U.S. households have donated to the tsunami relief, with a median contribution of less than $100, said former President Clinton. Whether or not the United States should have donated $350 million, the areas that were ravaged by the tsunami do need help to restore what was lost. If you do decide to donate to the cause, we encourage that you donate to a reputable relief organization. To contribute, Americans are directed to visit www.usafreedomcorps.gov, where they can find a comprehensive listing of organizations accepting donations to aid in the disaster relief. But for the future, the question remains whether our country can afford to devote resources to foreign disasters when a bigger disaster may be brewing in our own national economy.